Why did you fence off my lake? This is outrageous!
Shut up! I own this lake!
Imagine buying a quiet lakeside home for you and your daughter, only to wake up one morning and find a woman with a title calling your water community property and demanding $50 from an 8-year-old child to use it. That's exactly what happened to Kendrick Lawson, a black man who wanted nothing but peace for him and his 8-year-old daughter. When Kendrick Lawson bought the cabin on Lake Windermere, he wasn't just buying a home, he was reclaiming a piece of family peace that belonged to them for generations. His name is Kendrick Lawson, a black father raising an 8-year-old girl named Elena, and that lake, it was the heartbeat of their life. His deed included full lake rights, beach, dock, and the quiet water drifting against the rocks like a lullaby. Every morning before school, Elena would run barefoot across the grass, chasing ripples while Kendrick sipped coffee on the porch. It was theirs. No questions. No permissions. No politics. Then came the politics. 6 months after they settled in, Meadow Ridge Reserve elected a new HOA president, Cynthia Blake. The day she won, she stood in front of the clubhouse like she had just inherited a kingdom. People clapped politely, not realizing the monster they had just crowned. At first, it was small things. Emails about lawn height, threats over mailbox colors, warnings about unsanctioned decorative choices. Everyone rolled their eyes. But slowly, like rising water, Cynthia's influence spread toward the lake. Kendrick noticed it the day she installed a wooden sign at the trail entrance. Resident lake access fee, $25 per use. Underneath it in smaller letters, all revenue directed to lake maintenance and environmental preservation. Environmental preservation? She didn't even know what a cattail was. The woman once pointed to a floating log and called it a marine hazard. Still, neighbors paid the fee. Not because they agreed, but because Cynthia barked with the kind of confidence that makes weak people fold. It didn't stop there. A month later, she announced that only registered HOA guests could use the dock, and each guest had to pay an additional fee. Kendrick asked her when these rules were voted on. She smiled like he'd just told a joke she didn't like and answered, "As HOA president, I have discretionary authority over communal assets." The lake was not communal. It was deeded to Kendrick. But Cynthia spoke with the tone of a woman who believed repeating something made it true. One Saturday morning, Elena came running back up the hill, no ripples on her feet, just tears on her cheeks. Cynthia had blocked her path and demanded a $50 usage fine before she could touch the water. Elena's voice cracked as she cried into Kendrick's shirt, "Daddy, she said I have to pay before I use the lake." And that, right there, was the moment Kendrick stopped being polite. Have you ever watched someone take something that was never theirs to begin with? What would you do if your child was charged money to touch water that legally belonged to you? Before we dive in, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where our viewers are tuning in from. If you believe no child should cry because of someone else's ego, smash that like button and subscribe to Story Arc, because standing up to greed starts with one no. Kendrick Lawson didn't shout. He didn't storm down the hill or demand explanations from neighbors who were too scared of Cynthia Blake's clipboard power. Kendrick went inside, sat at his desk, and opened the thick folder from his closing documents. Everything Cynthia claimed authority over, Kendrick already owned on paper. The lake, the beach, the dock, every ripple of water tied legally to his property line. Arguments wouldn't fix what Cynthia truly believed. Cynthia believed she was the law. Kendrick believed in proof. All afternoon and late into the night, Kendrick studied every document, the deed, the boundary survey, the HOA covenants, and a century-old note from a previous owner confirming permanent lake rights attached to the land itself. Nothing in the HOA structure could override that. No vote, no policy, no fake maintenance fee sign. By the time the sun rose, Kendrick knew Cynthia wasn't just wrong. Cynthia was dangerous. The next morning, Kendrick walked to Cynthia's house with Elena beside him. Cynthia opened the door wearing a bright smile that never reached her eyes. Kendrick explained that Elena would use the lake without paying fines because the lake belonged to their property. Cynthia's expression flickered. She raised her chin and replied with a voice sharpened by self-importance. "As HOA president, I control all lake access. If you have a problem with that, file a complaint." Kendrick didn't answer. He had already wasted enough words. While Cynthia lectured about rules, Kendrick noticed the new additions at the waterline, a jet ski ramp, tiki poles, lounge chairs with tags from luxury retailers. Cynthia wasn't protecting the lake. Cynthia was claiming the lake. By the end of the week, Kendrick hired a surveyor. The man walked the entire shoreline, placing orange markers exactly where Kendrick expected, proving the lakefront line cut perfectly through the area Cynthia treated like her private resort. The jet ski ramp sat directly across both halves, 1 foot on Kendrick's property, one on nothing Cynthia legally controlled. Once the survey was filed with the county, Kendrick took the final step. At sunrise, a fence crew arrived. Trucks rolled in quietly, panels unloaded, posts anchored into earth. A straight wired wall began stretching from the grass through the beach across the dock and into the water, a boundary made of oak, paperwork, and patient revenge. Neighbors gathered in silence. Cynthia appeared mid-construction, staring at the fence like it was a personal attack. The lake she called hers was now divided, and everything Cynthia built on it was useless. Kendrick didn't argue. Kendrick built proof. By the time the final fence panel locked into place, half the neighborhood stood watching. The wired fence ran clean and straight, cutting through sand, dock, and shallow water like a ruler laid over the lake itself. It was a message that even Cynthia Blake could not ignore. Kendrick Lawson stood beside the survey posts, calm and silent, while whispers spread through the crowd. People weren't just shocked by the fence. They were shocked someone had finally challenged Cynthia. Cynthia stormed down the path in a hurry, sandals slapping the dirt, her robe fluttering behind her. The moment her eyes reached the fence line, her face twisted with disbelief. Half of her jet ski ramp now sat on the wrong side. The lounge chairs looked like stranded furniture. Even the shade poles leaned across the divide like confused soldiers. Cynthia pointed at Kendrick and screamed, "Take this down! You're vandalizing HOA property!" Kendrick didn't raise his voice. He simply handed her a folder containing the deed, the original survey, the updated survey, and the HOA covenants she ignored. Cynthia refused to look. Instead, she shouted at the neighbors, yelling phrases like illegal construction and community theft, as if emotion could erase legal boundaries. When Cynthia threatened the police, Kendrick only nodded. 10 minutes later, 2 officers walked along the path to the fence. Cynthia rushed toward them, waving her hands, trying to explain that the lake belonged to her authority. Kendrick stood beside the documents, waiting to be examined. One officer looked at the paperwork, the stamped county survey, and the original deed. He flipped through each page slowly. Cynthia kept talking. The officer finally raised a hand to quiet her. His voice was flat, professional, and clear. The lake frontage is deeded to this property. The fence is within his rights. Silence fell. Cynthia stared at the officer like he had betrayed her personally. The second officer advised Cynthia not to cross the fence line, then reminding her that stepping over now would be trespassing. Cynthia's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. No words came out. She turned, humiliated, and stomped back up the path the way she arrived. Neighbors murmured around Kendrick. Some nodded quietly, some smiled. A few even clapped under their breath. Kendrick didn't acknowledge the attention. He walked back toward his porch with Elena beside him. The lake was peaceful again, and the fence stood like a lesson carved in wood. But Cynthia Blake was not finished. That night, darkness carried her next move. Not apologies, retaliation. Night settled over Meadow Ridge Reserve with the kind of quiet that makes every cricket chirp sound like a warning. Kendrick Lawson sat in his living room, a soft lamp glowing beside his chair while Elena slept upstairs. Kendrick knew people like Cynthia Blake. Entitled power doesn't accept defeat, it plots. That fence was a reminder that her imagined authority had limits, and Cynthia was the kind of person who refused to believe limits applied to her. Just after 2 a.m., Kendrick watched the driveway camera blink. 3 figures emerged from the darkness along the lake path. Men dressed in black tactical vests, each vest printed with a bold white patch that read, HOA Enforcement. Their boots crunched over gravel. One carried a cordless saw, the second dragged a metal pry bar, the third hauled a toolbox. Behind them, barely visible in the weak beam of a flashlight, walked Cynthia Blake. Hood pulled up, face tight with determination. Cynthia whispered directions like she was leading a military raid instead of violating property lines. The men reached the first fence post and started inspecting the bolts. One signaled he was ready to cut. Cynthia stepped closer, watching with satisfaction. She believed that if she could remove the fence before morning, she could pretend the fence never existed, and that Kendrick imagined everything. Kendrick didn't move toward the door. He didn't yell or confront. He picked up his phone and made one call. "This is a trespassing attempt. They are dismantling a structure on my deeded property. I have the documents ready." When the first blade hit wired fence, sirens lit the path like lightning. 2 patrol cars tore through the neighborhood, tires grinding over gravel as red and blue lights shattered the shadows. Officers sprinted out with flashlights raised. The men froze mid-movement, tools clattering into the sand. Cynthia tried to explain, waving her hands, pointing at the fence, claiming HOA authority like a magic spell. The officers weren't impressed. Kendrick stepped onto the porch holding the deed, survey maps, and the earlier police report. One officer read the paperwork under the light of the patrol car and then looked directly at Cynthia. "You don't have any rights to this property. You're committing criminal vandalism and trespassing." The 3 hired men were detained first. One cursed under his breath about just doing a job. Cynthia's protests collapsed into a nervous whisper when the officers placed her under arrest next. As the patrol cars rolled away, Kendrick stood at the fence with Elena beside him, the morning breeze coming off the water. The lake was silent. No more fines. No more fences cut in the dark. Only calm, the kind Cynthia tried to steal, and the kind Kendrick took back. If you believe boundaries are built to protect, not to divide, hit like and subscribe to Story Arc.